Hello everybody, Tommyruin here, and in my opinion, group content in MMOs is the best content you can get. Coming together as a team and vanquishing a common foe just gives the best experience these games have to offer. In this video, I'm going to go over my experiences when I did my first dungeon run in Project Ascension. Now, to do group content, you have to have a group, and mine contained the best of the best. The Warcraft A-team. Forget Preach, forget Pajira, these were the guys you want when you're doing a dungeon. Our tank was a juggernaut. As Shrek once said, people are like onions. They have layers. Well, Rudiger was an onion on steroids, slapping defensive on defensive to make him the ultimate damage sponge. Susie was as versatile as can be. Originally a dot weaver, she ditched the dots and started using Renew and Rejuvenation, and had no mana problems thanks to Life Tap and Renew. Last but not least, the muscle, with Lefty, Cookie and I left to kill all that stood before us. We all had very similar builds, utilising the power of the Imp and Sinister Strike to deal heavy damage to our foes. So we teamed up and we went to run Wailing Caverns, and we had a blast. It was a great time trying out all these new builds in these dungeons, having people tank with their own tanking style, having people heal with their own healing style, and people dealing damage in their own unique style. It was great to see how people built their own classes, and it was also great to test out the Ascension custom dungeon scaling mechanism which they have. The custom scaling helps compensate for the vast amount of different builds that people have in comparison to what you would have in vanilla content, and it mostly affects the higher end dungeons due to the power creep which you have when you get up that high, but it is still prevalent in the lower level dungeons, and some tuning has taken place and they are looking really solid right now. The dungeons are very good. In terms of build diversity, us damage dealers were pretty similar, I must say. We all ran with the Imp because the Imp is very strong at the lower levels, and we all were melee, and that is mainly because casters at the lower levels have quite bad mana problems, which I think is a shame because casting is a very different style of play and one that is very enjoyable. Being able to assault your enemies from afar is something very different from going toe to toe with them in the melee. So it's a shame that DPS specs are more suited towards melee at the lower levels for these mana reasons, but Susie, the healer which we had in this run, had a great build going where she ran with Life Tap, which gives you mana for the health which you have, and she was running with that and then also some very strong heals, and what that would do is effectively regen your health faster than it saps it with Life Tap. So there are some ways to go about getting rid of this problem, but it is not as good as mana regen is currently on live, but then it works differently as you go higher up. Being a caster is much more viable around level 30. But us melees, we had no problem in actually dealing damage. Sometimes I was a bit low because I am a lot lower level than these guys. I was about 6 levels lower, but we didn't struggle and we only wiped a few times. In terms of the tank, Rudiger had little to no problems with his tanking because he stacked so many defensive abilities. But one thing which you don't really think about when you are leveling up and you want to tank is, I'm going to have to get a taunt at some point. So we were without taunt throughout this whole run, but if he attacked first, he usually got the aggro and we were usually fine. Sometimes I charged in, stole the aggro and died. That only happened a few times before I learnt my lesson. But one thing which is interesting about the server is if you want to tank, you really have to go for it. You have to pick up abilities like Taunt and other defensive abilities so you are viable to take the hits from the enemies. It is slightly more flexible though because you can pick up other abilities that will make your life easier and choose abilities from different classes. So there are some caveats to being able to do the classless system, but some things still do apply and a Taunt is probably needed for most tanks when they are doing dungeons. We were running with a hybrid healer. Susie was leveling as a kind of dot weaver affliction warlock mix, and had a few healing spells to hand, so she was nominated as the healer for this group. And she didn't really struggle. The HOTS seemed to hold for most of the time, We did die a few times because the direct damage was just too strong, but it seemed okay, and I think healing, due to the amount of defensive abilities which tanks can stack, is normally not a problem. It's mainly when other people in the party get attacked that problems start to apply, and the healer has to overextend to deal with the problem. But I think at the end game, when you are specced out to the max, healing is going to be so much fun because you've got so many different resources to use and abilities to choose from. So what I've heard about the dynamic scaling of the dungeons is that it's done by an algorithm which the developers have come up with, and what it does is makes the dungeons more challenging dependent on your level. So the higher level you are, you're going to be running things like Upper Blackrock Spire, Stratholme, things like that, and those dungeons are going to be considerably harder than they would be on a regular client. And that is because, due to the diversity of the builds that are available, the power creep is magnificent. So what they've done is, to compensate for that, they've made the dungeons harder and scaled it all using their algorithm, which I think is a great way to do it. Instead of just having face roll dungeons for free gear like it is on the live game at the moment in Legion, they've made it so that dungeons are challenging even though everyone is much more powerful than they should be. And this means that the sense of reward for completing them is still there, and it means that they are a challenge, and that is great. Previously, when they implemented this algorithm, the lower level dungeons were completely whack and they were not scaled correctly, but they've corrected this all now and it's looking peachy. It is looking so nice. And running this dungeon, it was not too challenging, but there was also that sense that if you made a mistake, you could die. If you pulled one too many mob, you will die. And that fear is something which is really good in an MMO dungeon. So, to summarise this little ramble which I've had about dungeons for the last 5 or 6 minutes, I had a great time when running a dungeon in Ascension. Being able to see people's creations come into fruition when they are running a dungeon is amazing, and having those synergies between different builds is something really unique in World of Warcraft. The dungeon scaling algorithm which they've put in is working very well, and I'm looking forward to doing more in the future. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and I will see you all very soon.